valid. I mean, check it out. And then I didn't hear from them again.
You don't think they ever meet to channel the 9? You wouldn't know. We wouldn't. Nobody would know about it, I guess.
According to them, they are still in contact with the 9. The people who contacted me led me to believe that they were still doing this. Otherwise, why would they even bother?
And then look who was behind Esalen, and look at the forces behind Esalen itself. I mean, there were CIA people behind that. That was being funded by the CIA. There was a whole experimentation in the 1970s about trying to weaponize the paranormal from the CIA point of view, and from the Army point of view. And Jimmy Channon and John Alexander, and they were all involved in this weaponization of the paranormal. Going on in the 70s and 80s. The First Earth Battalion, men who stare at goats.
And remote viewing.
And remote viewing. Yeah. So how do you think, we could talk about Oswald all night, how do you think the 9 fit into the Kennedy assassination? What did Kennedy do? I have my own theory about Max Jacobson and liquid methamphetamines, and the guy was absolutely a loose cannon. But what do you think he did that precipitated, that put into motion the plot to assassinate him?
Well, if we go back to what we know he was planning, pulling out of Vietnam, for instance, which I think was a major factor, and I think that was essential. That was at the heart of it. There's a possibility, and there's a pretty good argument being made that killing Jack was a warning to Bobby. To lay off the mob,
because of the committee and Jimmy Hoffa.
That's crazy. I mean, you don't kill a president as a warning.
Not from the mob's point of view.
No, but
it's
too earth-shaking. I think.
And remember, Max Jacobson was the link between Kennedy and Judith Exner Campbell and Sam Giancana.
Well, next week we have Ken Thomas on, and he's also written about Maury Island, and so much of it goes back to Maury. Maury
Fred
Island
Crispin,
thing is.
Yeah.
No,
Sure.
but Ken Thomas has written a book about, Fred Crispin.
Yes, Fred Crispin. Yeah.
And Guy Bannister.
And Guy Bannister, and it was Guy Bannister, and I love your story about Guy Bannister. It's Guy Bannister who takes the confession from Harold Dahl. The whole thing was a hoax.
Yep.
Right? Harold Dahl says to the FBI after those two pilots, Frank Brown and I forget the captain's name, go down in Kelso. It was, by the way, heavily ferrous material that was in the bomb bay that basically tripped the circuit breakers and started the fire that brought down the B-25. But anyway, and it was in like a Kellogg's cornflakes carton or something. It was ridiculous. They didn't want to take it back with them to California. They looked at this stuff and said it's slag. It's from the smelting. Oh no, and there's Crispin pushing. They put it on the plane. They didn't know that it was so ferrous, so magnetic, that when the circuit breakers kicked in, it would override the circuit breakers, overheat the circuit, and start a fire. So, okay, the question is, yes, Kennedy's pulling out of Vietnam and killing the CIA paramilitary kills their ability to traffic in drugs in Southeast Asia. They were fronting for the drug lords in Southeast Asia. And could it have been like the CIA's self-preservation, especially after the Bay of Pigs failed?
Well, yeah. I mean, Kennedy had threatened to destroy the CIA, basically. I mean, after Bay of Pigs. I mean, so the CIA knew their days were numbered as long as Kennedy was alive. And if he had won the election in '64 and pulled troops out of Vietnam, the CIA was next on the hit list, I think.
Right. And so you have basically the Sam Giancana folks who feel screwed off because they made a deal with Joe Sr. And then here's Bobby. And, he's having the mob hearings, right? You've got the CIA whose very existence is now threatened. You've got the Cubans who were furious. Was it the perfect storm?
Yeah, I think so. I think he didn't have a chance. I mean, there was an article in Esquire magazine about 30 years ago on the Kennedy assassination story, and they said there were so many people who wanted him dead, it was practically a democratic act. You had the CIA who wanted him gone. You had the mob who wanted him gone. I mean, you had the military who wanted him gone. You had the oil guys who wanted him gone. I mean, there were just so many people, who had it in for Kennedy that he didn't stand a chance. And I parallel that with poor Lee Oswald, who is surrounded by some of the strangest people you'd ever want to meet. It wasn't just that he was strange. He had a lot of very strange friends. The nine being one aspect of what was going on, and then he had the Orthodox Church guys from Hoover's backyard, and they're all over him. I mean, he didn't have a chance. I mean, the whole thing was stage managed to death. Literally.
It was, and then try and explain how a guy like Lee Harvey Oswald could speak Russian fluently.
Yeah.
I mean, where did he learn Russian? Where in his background is? And this guy was heavily studied. Where did he learn Russian?
I need to let you know we only have 10 more minutes,
Okay.
and I wanted to just. I hate doing this, but I feel like we only have Peter on for a few seconds, and some people believe that the Kennedy assassination was a form of ceremony almost, and they think the same thing about 9/11. And I wonder if you ever have delved into the concept of something huge like this as a ceremony for some reason. In an occult way.
Actually, the point it began to be made with the Kennedy assassination because it did look very ritualistic. The whole thing was ritualistic, and I make the point that there was a Belgian mystic back around the turn of the century who prefigured the entire assassination. He wrote a play about the assassination before Kennedy was even born.
Wow.
And it was called The Cloud That Lifted, I think. And in this play, you have the head of state who's murdered, shot to death by shots they're not sure where they came from. There was a grassy knoll in front of him. They arrest somebody called Alec, who thought he was working for Russia. I mean, the whole thing written in the 1920s, before Kennedy was even born. So there's a mystical component to it. And I think that events of this nature, they cross over a line. They cease to be a normal, everyday occurrence. As I said earlier in this discussion, a manipulation of reality, a manipulation of what we're experiencing. And I think the Kennedy assassination was one. And I've been in contact with people who've been insisting that 9/11 was a similar ritualistic act. I mean, there's so many, iconic, images from it.
Masonic images. Yeah, there's a fella in Canada who he goes by various names, but he talks a lot about synchromysticism, stuff like that, and he slices up movies to show all these messages, Masonic messages. And he's a fun person to listen to. But supposedly, I personally think one of the distortions of reality was when the election was stolen right before our eyes. Anybody who bothered to watch every step of the Supreme Court hearings could hear that it was being stolen. You could just see it in plain sight, and that struck me as a reality distortion field almost.
Right, and this is what I think we have to understand before we can understand history. Hopefully, as we learn more about quantum mechanics and quantum physics, we're going to be able to apply those concepts to history. So far, we're treating history as Newtonian. What goes up must come down, the force of gravity, et cetera, the world that we're used to living in through our senses may not be the real world in a way. I know this sounds kind of far out, but it's some of the things that have been preoccupying me where synchronicity is concerned. Looking at synchronicity as though it's the evidence of a different kind of structure behind reality that some of us evidently are aware of and are using it, at exploiting the rest of us who are not aware of it.
Well, the whole principle of quantum entanglement and non-locality and of the future creating the past. I mean, all of these things, you're absolutely right, Peter, all of these things apply to what's going on with reality. I mean, reality, there's like a double measure of reality. One is, you're right, and you describe it well, as a Newtonian reality. There's a logical causality. Things fall down from trees, right? But there's also this it's almost science fiction-y, but it's not science fiction. It is, can particles come from the future into the past? Can messages come into the past? Are things, if remote viewing is real, and I believe it is, then it's not paranormal. It's simply the normal in paranormal if you're able to pick up on the non-locality of the universe.
Well, it's proof of collective unconscious. It's proof of some kind of a
kind of a Jungian
welded
universe.
mind thing or something.
Right. Yeah, you could look at it that way. And I think that if if we employ these ideas towards understanding history, we're going to see that a lot of history starts to make sense that really didn't make sense before, and that's unsettling because it means that the linear cause and effect relationship we're so used to may not be as simple as we think it is.
Well, a question that our chat, I apologize to chat, I could not get to the questions, all of them, but one question is, do you think there's such a thing as a force for good as well as a force for bad?
Wow, I hope so. Do I think that it really exists a force for good? Yeah, I mean, I do think so. I think we see that as well. I mean, not all of the synchronous events that I write about, necessarily have to be evil. There's a lot of synchronicity that goes on. There's a lot of cause and effect, or as we've been discussing it, that takes place that really does help people get cured from illnesses dramatically for no particular reason. People are saved from sudden death for various reasons that are impossible to explain. So I think that there's force for good as well. It may happen on a more individual basis, and the force for evil may be on a more social, large bodies of people, large groups of people, large organizations perhaps. But there still is, good, and I think individual people are the ones who bring that force of good to bear.
It sounds like you're really talking about certain kinds of memes. So you talk about the meme of a kind of a mass psychology is evil, kind of like the id monster in Forbidden Planet, right? It's the collective projection of evil which eventually destroys the population. That's what they discover. That's what Leslie Nielsen discovers.
Right. Yes.
Altair. Right. So you've got that. You're talking about history being somehow quantumly involved with very esoteric mathematics, and I keep thinking of Isaac Asimov's Psychohistory in the Foundation and Empire trilogy, the Foundation trilogy, in which what you have is this entire projection of non-locality on a universe that eventually, if things are tinkered with correctly, everything will work out just fine to bring, and the Foundationers will bring the world back to where it's supposed to be, correcting all the variations for chance. And then one person on our travels, a person very involved with French Cometa Report, said flat out, look, Isaac Asimov knew that there were extraterrestrials here and that Foundation and Empire was not science fiction. It was more science than it was fiction. And that blew my mind.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when he told me that, because I said, whoa, are you telling me that that he knew something? And the guy said, yeah, there are people, there are entities here, there are humanoids here, they live on this planet, they're very powerful, they're not presidents of corporations, but they're in positions to influence those presidents for a variety of ways. He said, read iRobot and see what happens. And he said, yeah, Asimov knew. That Asimov knew very, very early and couldn't talk about it, but wrote Foundation and Empire literally about it. And so I was fascinated by that. But, I mean, it really ties right into what you just said, Peter, about there's a whole there could be a whole quantum element of history that we're not even aware of because it's below our radar. It's too small for us to see.
And that means it can be manipulated by people who are aware of it.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, just imagine, I keep thinking of Paul H. Smith, who was an Army remote viewer who was trained by Ingo Swann, worked in the program with Harold Puthoff and Russell Targ, and at Stanford Research Institute, and then later at Fort Meade. And he's talking about Ed Dames, who was desperate to have him see a flying saucer. And I know we're running low. We have like a minute left. And not only did he see a flying saucer, but he was our flying saucer 20 years in the future, landing on Cassini, the Huygens robot craft. But he was transported, he thinks, 48 hours into the future to see the Iraqi, it's either a Silkworm or an Exocet missile attack on the USS Stark in the Persian Gulf back during the Reagan administration.
Huh.
And he sees it. And that blows his mind, as well as his bosses, his superior officers at Fort Meade. So I think you're right, and I think it's there. It is 8 o'clock Eastern time, much later your time. we have to go. But we're looking forward to it. First of all, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
These 90 minutes went like too fast.